it's been wonderful to have this time off.
Yeah.
It's also wonderful to have silence. Fine, right? When we became empty nesters, that was the thing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Parenthood. I'm your host, Neha Garg. This podcast is all about exploring the ups and downs, the joys, and the challenges of raising children. Each week, we dive deep into the stories of amazing parents who are navigating this complex journey, just like you and me. Today, we are diving into the journey of a writer whose life has been enriched by raising two incredible children. Joining me is Kalpana Mohan, who lives in California with her partner of 40 years, C. Mohan. Kalpana, welcome to Parenthood.
Thank you, Neha. Absolutely delighted to be here.
As always, before we delve into the story of your parenting and your life beyond that, let's get to know a bit about you. So, if you
Okay.
could tell us three words that capture who you are.
Oh my God. In 3 words, what shall I say? A reader,
Uh-huh.
someone who's reading, someone who's always introspecting on things, someone who's always arguing, debating with husband or children or the child-in-law. It doesn't matter who it is. There's always debate in my house.
Wow.
It's very enriching, I have to say. So you wanted to know a little bit about me.
Yeah.
Um, so I was born in 1961. That makes
Mhm.
me, my God, 62.
Yeah.
So our children are 34 and 30. Our son is 30, our daughter is 34. My daughter Pavitra is a journalist, much like me. She's a writer also.
Mhm.
So there's so much to talk about. Both my children are huge readers, so there's
Mhm.
invariably so much to argue and discuss and so on. I was born in 1961. I grew up mostly in India for the
Yeah.
first 11 years. And for the next about 6 or 7 years, I was in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Mhm.
Came back to India for my university education. And then in 1984, I met my husband. We had an arranged marriage. I met my husband, and in about 2.5 hours, I decided I was getting married to him, and I actually proposed to him. And that's a
You
big,
did?
big story. Yes. And apparently, it was such a weak proposal, but he accepted. So here we are, 40 years later.
Yeah.
I've lived in the San Francisco Bay Area since January 1985. In those
Uh-huh.
days, it was about a year's wait for the green card.
Yeah.
So I waited in India for that. And so, yeah, I've been here in the Bay Area, in literally the same area ever since. My
Mm-hmm.
husband for IBM forever, but we lived in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
uh, Never actually part of the Silicon Valley, the aggression of the valley, because he always worked at IBM, and
Yeah.
it was a different kind of it was a very family oriented
Yeah.
company.
Yeah.
Uh, so our lifestyle was a little different. We watched the valley, but we lived
Yeah.
in it, out
Yeah.
being part of it in a way.
Yeah.
But I do have to say that when it came to raising children and so on,
Mm.
you really began to ask questions when you were in this area. And
Yeah.
today, our children are both, as I said, I don't think I said that, are both in New York,
Uh-huh.
and so happy about coming back to the Bay Area, which they feel is a bubble.
Uh-huh.
Um, and that the real world is really more like New York. So they're
Yeah.
very happy to be out on the East Coast.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, did I,
Yeah,
anything
yeah,
else?
absolutely, absolutely. And since you are a writer, Kalpana, if you were to say that your life is a storybook, what would be its title and what chapter are you on currently?
Um, what chapter am I on? I feel I'm just beginning. And
Uh-huh.
if yeah, I just feel I'm beginning. I mean, I really feel like I'm really tapping into the strengths that I have.
Yeah.
And I feel like if my book would be about being creative, I think.
Uh-huh.
The story would be about tapping into my creativity. And I'm really at a very critical moment in my life
Uh-huh.
and being able to tap into greater strengths as I go. So
Yeah.
one of the to sort of tell you something about a little more about that.
Yeah.
I've always considered myself a writer, and I felt like I was not good at public speaking. I
Mm.
would I would really never want to be in front of an audience,
Mm-hmm.
never want to hold the mic. All
Mm-hmm.
right. But more and more I'm finding there are more and more opportunities, and people say that you really do have a gift. You are able to speak well. You should
Yeah.
do more of it,
Yeah.
right? So it just a couple of days ago I finished a course on India. It was part
Yeah.
of a 2-day course. I
Yeah.
taught a course on India here in the University of Santa Clara, and this
Mm-hmm.
was adult education. But that was one of the things that they said, that they like to hear me speak.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm discovering other strengths that I never knew existed at the age of 62, mind you.
Yeah. Yeah, this is
So
so inspiring, when you say that, because it's like, it's for, at least for people like me, who are, I think I was born old. I was born old. Like, I'm an old soul.
eyes.
And I have always loved
Uh-huh.
myself and my life even more as the years have passed by. And
Mhm.
with every passing year, I think this is the happiest I have ever been. This is the most fulfilled I have ever been. And it's just so inspiring to see you say that you are still discovering yourself when you are
Yeah, yeah.
62,
You
because
know,
that's
yeah,
very promising. And for
right.
someone like me, I'm just looking forward to aging gracefully, probably,
Yeah.
just like you are.
And I've actually heard, and I wish I could tell you where I heard this. Maybe it was a TED talk or something,
Hmm.
that 60s through the 80s are supposedly the most creative and the most
Uh-huh.
exciting parts of one's life. But, hopefully we'll live that long.
That was the thing that came to my head.
Post-retirement is when people are the most creative.
Yeah,
Maybe that's when they do the thing that they love the most.
yeah,
That really is not about making money. By then,
right.
that responsibility is done
Yeah,
away with.
yeah,
And so they're really able to be creative, maybe. I don't know.
yeah.
But this, I heard, and I genuinely do believe that.
Yeah. What a beautiful, beautiful title and beautiful, beautiful chapter that you are on, reflecting such growth and such wisdom. Would expect nothing less from you,
Thank
Kalpana. But
you.
also now, could you tell us a little bit about, both of your kids? You said they are in New York, they are 34 and 30 respectively. So
Right.
what do they like? What do they do?
Okay.
Anything.
So,
Yeah.
so our daughter was born in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember how one of the big things for me, for both my children, I have to say, is reading way before they started kindergarten, preschool and kindergarten and all that. The big, big deal for me was reading. I felt like in my time when I was growing up, my biggest inspiration was the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Uh-huh.
Those days you didn't even have libraries. Even
Yeah.
today, I
Yeah.
think for all of India's growth, I feel like the library system
Yeah.
needs big library system. It needs an overhaul. People
Yeah.
really need to sit down and think about this. And we can't be paying for a library.
Yeah.
I can't be going to a living library for books that I want to read. That's just not done. And I feel like even the British Council library we had in
Yeah.
Madras then was not adequate at all.
Yeah.
So you had to pay something for a membership. Not everybody could afford it.
Right.
And for my dad, everything was a challenge in the 60s. So for me, reading was such a big deal. And so I made sure that my kids read. And
Mhm.
literally every day we were at the library, literally every day. And I bring them back from school. And this is now after my son was born also.
Yeah.
1.5-year-old, you'd see him in his sleeper sitting on the library floor with books all around him and then say, come on, read to me, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Why the reason I bring that up is today it is such a huge part of their lives,
Right.
both lives. They are always reading and talking, as I said,
Yeah.
talking about. So for all of those early years, reading was a big deal. at
Hmm.
home and outside, right? And that really had an impact on the people they became, even in school, on their writing and everything, on their thinking for in the future. But even as they were growing up, I knew that one of the things that I wanted to give them was because we were living away from India, I
Right.
had to give India to them.
Yeah.
And I had to create that environment. And
Right.
so even as early as about when my daughter was 3, I was looking for a very good dance teacher, a
Yeah.
very good music teacher, and so on. So I put her in music early. By about 4, she was in classical Carnatic music.
Right.
By 3, I was asking a woman who I knew I had to be my daughter's dance teacher, and she said, no, you need to wait for some time. So it
Yeah.
was 4.5. Likewise for our son.
Yeah.
And for both of them, I was also very keen that they should learn Western music because,
Right.
I felt like I needed to give both. And
Yeah.
so we enrolled them in violin lessons.
Yeah.
And so Pavitra and Parthi were in music, in the arts, in Indian as well as Western, from the day they turned about 4. Our son, by the time he turned 3, although he manipulated his teacher, so she didn't quite care for it, his music teacher. So from then all the way to the time they graduated from high school, it was
Wow.
always part of their lives. So naturally, life was very busy. It was exhausting sometimes, and I felt like they were overscheduled children.
Yeah.
But looking back, I think that's really, really enriched their lives and who they became later.
Yeah.
Because I think beauty in art, I mean, everything that you give is so important because it in somewhere deep inside, it teaches them about something beautiful.
Yeah.
And so often we don't realize that art can have an impact on all the things that you do later on.
Right.
So, a beautiful phrase in music or a beautiful movement in dance
Yeah.
brings grace into some other aspect of your
Right.
life, I believe.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah.
it will have an impact in your life at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah.
Is what I
And
believe.
you just sound like such a hands-on parent, who instilled a love for art and this appreciation for art in your children. So, what were some of your other parenting philosophies while they were growing up?
Oh my God, I have to think about that now. Um, I think trying to tell me as much as possible. So, talking to me freely.
Right.
And because I didn't realize the importance of that until they became much older.
Right.
Because having an open conversation with your children as they are growing up is so important. So
Yeah.
you pick them up, they get into your car, and you're coming back. So what happened today? Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you didn't want to talk. You knew something was wrong. You knew something was wrong by just the way they said something, or the way they sighed,
Yeah.
or the way they kept silent.
Yeah.
So I think having early on, it was important for me to be talking to the kids, to
Yeah.
have them very chatty.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think that's still very important, I think, till today,
Yeah.
that
But
they can feel that they can reach out to
how do
you.
you enable that? How do you enable that kind of environment? Because as
I
you
know.
said, if the child is not talking, how do you
Yeah.
do that without maybe considered too pushy or not not just not pushing them off?
Right. It is a very hard thing. I think it has to happen organically.
Yeah.
And I probably would just talk to them all the time. My husband is very chatty also. So
Yeah.
when he's in the house, we are always talking. Of
Yeah.
course, I mean, it also leads to arguments, tons of arguments. But I'd rather have a chatty family,
Right.
the
Than a
family
silent
that's
one.
not, yeah, communicating as
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think I just it was all just part of our lives, that we were doing a lot of maybe crafts together.
Yeah.
Were often in the car together because I was driving them so much. In
Yeah.
fact, in the early years, I was driving probably an hour to our son's music lesson
Oh.
in, in faraway Fremont. I lived in San Jose at that point. So
Uh-huh.
San Jose to Fremont is about 45 minutes, and invariably it was in traffic
Mm.
both ways. So invariably we were in the car for about an hour and a half,
Yeah.
and I would pack snacks into in the car, and we were talking and chatting the whole way, all three of us. My
Yeah.
husband would be at work, obviously.
Yeah.
I got off early at work, picked them up, and the whole time we spent hours in the car for years. And
Yeah.
I think that naturally forces you into that, intimate space. It
Yeah.
forces you to
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah. The
So I think
physical proximity of it, all. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it happened organically in my case. And
Yeah.
then they learn by watching, right? They learn that, they are watching very talkative parents.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
too, that too.
Yeah. And Kalpana, tell us about the early years, when they were just born and you are in a, I mean, even though you were living there for quite some time, 5 years by the time your daughter was born, but
Right.
still, you had kind of a lonely parenting journey, if I could say that.
Uh,
Was it such?
Not really, because it turns out when I had my daughter, I mean, I guess for my daughters, it was a little lonelier. My parents landed on their first visit to the US. They landed in Boston,
Oh,
and they landed the airport. My husband has gone to pick them up, and he was planning to show them around the East Coast at that time.
yeah.
So on that first call, I pick up the phone, and I've just discovered that I'm expecting Pavitra, my
Wow.
daughter. Right? Um, in those times, you didn't find the gender and all that. You
Right.
only knew after you had the baby. But anyway, I was expecting, and I was so excited. My husband wasn't here. And
Yeah.
so three of them were so excited. But here was a problem. They had booked themselves to be in the US on a 1 year trip.
Wow.
So they were on this 1 year world tour, with the US being the most their biggest,
Primary.
the
Yeah.
prime area of visit. But anyway, so here we were suddenly with a new problem, because 9 months later I'd be delivering my baby,
Yeah.
and then I'd not have their help for several. I mean, after about a few weeks,
Yeah.
I would not have their help, right?
Yeah.
And in those years, we had a maternity leave. I remember, because I had a C-section,
Yeah.
we had maternity leave for only, I want to say, 8 weeks. But
Eight
for an
weeks.
8 weeks after delivery. But for a normal
Yeah.
delivery, it was 6 weeks.
Six
And
weeks.
today, 6 weeks. And can you imagine a parent separating from a child in 6 weeks? Again, fortunately, now when I think back, I had two C-sections, both were
Yeah.
C-sections. So what I want to say is I had the most beautiful 9 months, because I had my mother's food daily. And so every day was a delight while I was
Yeah.
expecting my daughter.
Yeah.
And then I deliver her. Obviously, having your parents around you when you're
Yeah.
about to deliver is also stressful, because they are anxious parent. They were anxious parents,
Yeah.
and so their anxiety sometimes
Passes on.
passed on to me and brought me down sometimes.
Yeah.
But it was all in good faith and everything, right? And my husband makes up for all that by not worrying all.
At all.
Okay, all, no worries. So when did deliver Pavitra, it was after a 22-hour labor, at
Oh
the
my
end of
God.
which, during that 22-hour labor, the progression, what do you call it? Cervical, what do
Yeah.
you call it?
Dilation.
Dilation, right? God, I've even forgotten all that. I dilated to about 6.5 or something, and it actually regressed.
Oh
My
my.
daughter went back inside. So at the end of it, they did a C-section. So it wasn't, ultimately, it was a little disappointing in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But because with C-section comes a lot more blood loss, and I was already anemic. So for about a month, I wasn't myself.
Yeah.
And trust me, the other thing I want to mention is for someone like me who has never known depression,
Yeah.
felt the beginnings of depression.
Right.
And then I realized there is something called postpartum depression.
Yeah.
Having parents around me living with me was so important
Yeah.
because when I brought it up with my father. He said, "Come on, we're all here for you. Why are you even, feeling this way when you're surrounded by us and
Yeah.
we are here to help you. You shouldn't feel like this, right?" And all that helped me come out of it. And I could see why feeling very weak and having had that, even that small amount of blood loss,
Yeah.
whatever it was, have impacted me. And even feeling physically and mentally low, I realized, man, there is something called depression. People would talk about it, but I had never experienced it, and I felt it really then, right? And I felt it not just that time, I felt it even after I delivered my son,
Yeah.
which were again was, and that was an emergency C-section
Yeah.
because I lost the mucus plug.
Okay.
Um, I had the water. I lost all the water, and I was literally slapped onto the bed.
Yeah.
And I remember the doctor yelling at the nurses, "We need to get the baby out now," kind of thing. So that was the opposite of Pavitra. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting. Pavitra and Parthiv are very different people. And sometimes the way they were born was also very different.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting when you look back on that
Yeah.
early aspect of their life.
Right.
Um, and the big joke in my house, and my daughter will still say, "Yeah, mom," and roll her eyes. I'll tell Pavitra, I'd call her to come out of the room to please come and eat. And she will not come out of the room. And
Yeah.
I'll say, "You never came out of the womb, you never come out of your room." So anyway, okay, I still say it to her. But yeah, our son is an emergency. Even today, something will happen, and I know, it's a bit of an emergency. So,
Right.
it
Yeah.
still happens that way so much.
Yeah.
But one thing that I would say is that after that 1 month, I began driving, and
Right.
so 1 month of recovery from C, and then everything seemed to be, I was back in place.
Yeah.
And I think this getting out into the world, driving,
Yeah.
being my made a big deal,
Yeah.
was a big deal for me. And so the first time around, as I said, I didn't have my parents to help me
Yeah.
for beyond about 8 weeks.
Yeah.
So I found a wonderful personal daycare where Pavitra and the daycare lady's own child were the only two children.
Oh,
Pavitra got a lot of personalized care from
right.
Surya Mansuri, a lady, an Iranian Persian woman who did a wonderful job of caring for her for 2 years or two and
Yeah.
a half years. So, and I didn't worry. I worked for about 8 hours, but
Uh-huh.
I didn't worry because I knew she was
Her
really
care.
cared
Yeah.
for, like, it's her own child. So, and Pavitra built up a friendship with Soreya's daughter.
Right.
So she had early on, she had someone to emulate, to have fun with, and so on.
Yeah.
So that was also really nice. For that social engagement and all that.
Right.
Our son, on the other hand, had a lot of medical issues. Early on,
Mm.
we discovered he had eczema
Oh,
within 6 weeks. And in fact, prior to that, so, life, so for that, the second pregnancy, we planned it nicely, and my parents arrived literally 2 or 3 weeks before the baby was born. So
oh,
now they stayed, in those days, it was a 6-month visa, and
yeah.
they stayed for 6 months after that, and they
Wow.
extended it, I think, by another couple of months. So
Yeah.
here is the thing, right? This time around, I had a lot of help post pregnancy.
Right.
Spot within about, I want to say, within about 18 days or so, he was not feeding properly. He'd throw
Oh,
up. So
oh,
he had what's called projectile vomiting.
oh,
So it was unbelievable how distinct it was. It was a certain kind of vomiting.
yeah.
And this is the first question I was asked. How is it? Is it like shooting through the room kind of?
Yeah.
Yes, it
Yes.
was. As soon as he fed, so I was breastfeeding,
Breastfeeding.
right? And he would lift his face, and it would just come out in that, in one straight arrow,
Projectile. Yeah.
projectile, vomiting. So by and by, in a couple of days, because he was losing fluids, we discovered it was called pyloric stenosis. So this is when, God, I hope I'm able to say this right, but there is a pylorus muscle that feeds from the esophagus into the stomach.
Right.
And that muscle, in one out of 125
Wow.
firstborn males, one
First
out
born
of
males,
25 firstborn males, this can happen where there is a twisting of that pylorus muscle,
which causes.
causes the baby to just regurgitate the food. Very clear signs, and but it's one thing to go in with this, but we were with what's called a Kaiser. It's called Health Maintenance Organization, where they don't jump to do tests right away. They
Right.
also want to watch and wait. So
Yeah.
we did lose a little time in this.
Yeah.
In any case, right after it was, they've diagnosed it, and they diagnosed it by what's called a barium test. And that was probably one of the hardest, if you talk about the hardest days of my life, it
Yeah.
would be one, where this child of 21 days or 20 days was just plastered onto this thing, tied up to a bed. And my husband, they asked me to go in. I said, there's no way I can bear this. So
Yeah.
my husband went in. He had to wear this lead cover, and he had to hold the baby, even though I think, oh no, there was nothing to put the baby onto the bed. I think he had to hold him down
Oh,
while this dye was injected. And they told, as soon as the doctor saw the screen, he said, "Oh my God, a classic case." And that's when the following morning, in fact, all night, the baby was not given any food or water. And so you talk about the hardest day of my life. That was probably the hardest day, where he just cried and cried and cried until, nothing could go in, right? So he just cried until he lost the ability to cry. So,
yeah.
that was hard. That was a very hard day.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what to say because you went through it and listening to it,
Yeah.
just
Still
listening
hard.
to it is very hard.
Very hard. Yeah. So, at 7:30, they took him into surgery, a very quick surgery. Thanks. So the surgery itself is, um, it's not invasive. It's just the pulling. Can you believe it? The pulling
The
of the
muscle.
muscle.
Yeah. Just to
Take
straighten it
this
up.
release of the muscle. That's all.
Yeah.
Simple thing. So it was just a small cut. That's all that was made on him. Um, and literally the day after he started eating, this child started putting on so much weight and recovered in no time. But so that's the thing. Everything is, you can't rejoice in things long enough, it seems
Yeah.
sometimes. Because a few weeks after that, we saw the first signs of um, some kind of something on his skin,
Yeah.
reddening of his skin.
Yeah.
He would itch
Yeah.
endlessly, even while sleeping. We saw that reddening, and then in some cases there was weeping of the skin. There
Oh,
was water, and we realized soon enough that this child had eczema.
right.
Now started, he was we with eczema and so on. When a child is that little, you start looking at, okay, what needs to be changed with respect to
Right.
diet,
Yeah.
because that's the only thing we are. The child is not running, the child is not lying and rolling on grass and all of that. So there aren't those sorts of allergens. So, what
Right.
are the agents? So, we would now investigate what he was having. So, whether breast milk itself was a
Yeah.
problem, it turns out that was fine.
Yeah.
That was fine, but it was other kinds of formula that I had added,
Yeah.
which I could not add at that point. But by and by, we would discover many things that he was allergic to. Sesame was something, I think in his older years, sesame was dreadful. Any colorants in food that he was eating could
Oh.
have result in problems. The thickening of his lips, the reddening of his face. We lived in Paris for about a year in 1998 to 99. And I remember we were in the Marais district. We bought a falafel,
Hmm.
so there was a Jewish quarter. It's just a fabulous place to eat in. And this fellow had something in the falafel. I think he dipped it into the sauce or something. And next minute, you could it happens almost instantaneously when he's
Yeah.
allergic to something. It happened then. Now he's on his own, managing his own health,
Right.
and doing it with a lot of maturity, I must say. So, we had to rush. We had to take a cab to the closest hospital because there was, I noticed that this part was also thickening. His eyes were thickening.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we've lived with this sword of Damocles, this
Yeah.
fear a lot of our lives. In those, especially those early years, we also he had to undergo another series of tests over the years where they would actually draw a chart on the back of his body, and it would be divided into some 120 cubes. And in each one, they would inject one kind of um,
Allergen.
allergen. So it could be, so one would be peanut, one would be
Yeah.
sesame. So they would do that. The doctors and the doctor came in. He says, "I can't bear this. I
Yeah.
just can't bear
My
this."
God.
And he just, you could, I was upset. This was a boy now of about 12 or 13, very brave and all that. So he's been through an entire gamut of problems related to eczema. Eczema often becomes this other friend of eczema, which is asthma. So he manages his life. He's had all of these things. But through it all, he had this extremely busy, both the children, of course. Pavitra was a dancer. She did her debut in an Arangetram in Bharatanatyam. Also did several performances in violin year after year, both of them
Yeah.
in Western as well. And Parthiv is a Carnatic, trained Carnatic violinist and vocalist.
Yeah.
And in fact, last week he performed on stage for an Arangetram.
Wow.
A girl was dancing and he performed as a lead vocalist. Most
Right.
often he's invited as a violinist, but this time he told the teacher he wanted to sing. So he sang. So I'm saying we've been through a very difficult few years,
Yeah.
but at the end of it, I think what helps is to have grit.
Yeah.
You're born with it or you're, not born with it, but I think doing all these things, getting the children to have their milestones,
Yeah.
sort of develops their personality, and I think it teaches them grit. There,
Yeah.
there was a lot of disappointment the whole way while they were learning these art forms and so on. There was
Right.
disappointment. There are times they didn't do well.
Yeah.
All of the ups and downs also shape your personality, I
Yeah.
think. Um, so yeah,
And I
I
think
long answer to your
yeah.
question.
No, but I think what stands out to me in all of this is, how you talk about grit, but what stands out to me is how you have nurtured both of your children's curiosity and this kind of kind of provided a love for learning, to them, in the sense that even in the most dire circumstances, by your own example and by, I know, in when you are in that situation, you have no choice but to get through it all. But how you get through it all is
Right.
also very, very important. And even though maybe your children were too young to understand how you were
Right.
facing it all, but I think it's somewhere it also shapes them as who they are, as people, as adults, when they just imbibe that from the atmosphere, from the environment, without you telling them to be
Right.
how to be, in
Certain way.
that sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I am thinking about, just for a minute, I want to shift the focus from your children to you. I just find it so fascinating, Kalpana, that you you did it all, and you did it all with so much, I think, courage and compassion, with not just
But
towards your children. Yeah.
right. I do have to say, on that particular day, I told you when my son was in the surgery, had to go into
Right.
surgery, and the previous night he couldn't eat or drink
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
right? I could not have done it without my husband that day.
Yeah.
And the whole time, I still remember I was just sitting there because I literally catatonic in a way. I
Right.
just didn't know how to help this child.
Yeah.
And I remember the whole night, my husband paced back and forth the room. He paced the room,
Yeah.
holding this fellow close to him. And it's sort of in some ways, it shows you how your partner needs to be gritty. He needs to be gutsy
Yeah.
in order for you to get through something like this.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that night. I think it was the hardest night of our lives,
Yeah.
when he just kept doing this the whole night until the baby could be taken wheeled into surgery,
Right.
Um, so yeah, while in the I joke around that I'm the one who's borne the burden of it all after that. Uh, most of the classes and for most things, I was the one doing it all.
Yeah.
My husband certainly dropped our daughter and son to school every day. He
Yeah.
did that. But otherwise, if there was a call from the school, it was me. It was the mother
Yeah.
who ran to do stuff, right? But he was the one who was bringing home most of the bread.
Yeah.
So he needed to be there at
Yeah.
work most of the time. So it was certainly skewed in some sense.
Yeah.
Uh, but he's always been there,
Right.
and on difficult days, he would be there,
Through and
taking
through, just
charge
standing. Yeah.
on very
Yeah.
difficult days.
Yeah.
And he was always there for all the big moments of the children's lives because he traveled a lot, but typically he was there for everything. But he's also been a very tough parent in one sense, and I think it's been good for the kids in that when they were in college, for instance,
Hmm.
he would say, uh, we would not visit them that much.
Mm-hmm.
And so year to year, when they were, especially our daughter, she's
Hmm.
a tough cookie. And during the movement of one year to the next,
Yeah.
when we moved dorms and so on, she just managed it all. And I would say, how are you going to do it? She says, oh, I've called movers, or, we all manage it, mom, blah, 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 right? You
Yeah.
would not imagine that she's a tough cookie,
Yeah.
but she is. And likewise, when she went for her internship
Yeah.
from her college to New York,
Yeah.
she flew from college to New York. She had to have a whole setup in New York. How she did it, I don't know, but she did.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. It's the ability to manage
Yeah.
even that I never knew she was capable of because
Yeah.
I was a helicopter parent. But
Yeah.
my husband would constantly remind me, get off of their backs,
Yeah.
because they need to be on their own in college. You can't hover over them so much. So he was
Right.
always reminding me to be a more evolved parent. So
Right.
in that sense, I think he was very good.
Yeah. And I think
Also,
also what happens is, Kalpana, like I am just, the more you tell me your story, the more I'm in awe of how much, how aware you are of the whole situation. Because sometimes what I feel is that it's not by choice, the situations we are in, or the roles that are assigned to us, but it is by design. It is how it is, because as you said, if your husband was at home and the roles were not so skewed, there would not be enough bread on the table. So
Very
somebody
true.
had
Let's
to
be
get that.
realistic. And
And
I have to, yeah, say that we are living in the Silicon Valley, one of the most expensive areas in the United States.
right.
So be able to even buy a house in the area is not a joke. And we
Yeah,
were all fortunate because we came here. My husband came to the US in the 70s. I came here in the 80s. We were able to save up a lot compared to the people of today.
yeah,
So it was much easier for us. And
yeah,
even then, life in the valley is very demanding.
yeah.
Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt.
No, no,
Yeah,
it's absolutely, I'm just so amazed at this thing, because what happens, and we've been having these conversation more and more when we think about, this whole confused masculinity, because as the women are getting evolved, and they are talking about their rights and equality in this world, and they're coming into a sense of their own and having agency, suddenly, because there is, as much as we want to say that, okay, men and women both can be this, but there has to be a balance. There has somebody, for someone to grow, someone has to shrink, because it's
my
ultimately, and especially when you are in a household situation, like, because there is something to be done, the household, forget about everything else, the household chores. If the woman has to manage house and the managing the house in terms of operations, and managing the house in terms of finances, then somebody somewhere she
something
will.
has got to give.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And then I think men are also having a very I think they're having a sort of an identity crisis these days,
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
the women are liberated and evolved, and there's this whole
You can
wave of
manage it
feminism.
all.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the men suddenly are not, maybe they are not raised to be. I mean, the women are being raised to be equal wives, but the men are not raised to be equal husbands or equal partners, so to say. So,
Mhm.
and they want to be. There is no,
Yeah.
it's not a question of intention, but it's a question of, the societal conditioning. It's a
Yeah.
question of exposure. And I think it really, really limits and makes the men, especially the men of my generation, very confused about how to be present. And
Mm.
there are only a few people, who have the liberty of, like my husband, he has the liberty because he has his own business. We both work from home, and so he can be there. But we have our friends who are just struggling with that notion, because they want to be there.
Somebody has to go out to work.
Yeah,
Like
and their
we are work
wives
from
are
the house.
constantly complaining, because you have those ambitions, you nurture those ambitions, and you want your partner to be an equal parent, but just because it's just so complicated.
It is very complicated. And I actually forgot to say that for when it came to my son's birth, by then we had what's called permanent part-time at
Yeah,
IBM. So, I think regular part-time they called it. So you could work after my maternity leave.
yeah,
I took, in fact, because our son was ill, I
yeah.
took off a year. I took off a
Oh,
whole year.
wow.
Yes, yeah, I didn't even work for a year, if I remember right. And then I went back as a regular part-time. So it
Mm-hmm.
was like 32 hours.
Yeah,
And so instead of 40, right?
yeah,
So we had all these wonderful things thanks to IBM being so
yeah,
thoughtful in compared to so many other companies at the time. But I still felt, even then, I
yeah.
felt so stretched
Right.
because so many times when my husband was gone for several, and he would not go away for 1 week, he was gone for 2 weeks,
Yeah.
or more sometimes, and I had to keep everything
Running.
chugging,
Yeah.
running. But there was, I still remember a week or 10 days when he was in South America,
Yeah.
and all three of us fell sick.
Oh my.
And yeah, our daughter was 6, I didn't think, Parthiv. My son was 2, and I was also sick, so there were some nightmarish times.
Yeah.
But the thing that I did tell you is after my son was born, my parents were home with
Yeah.
us for a time. That really, really helped me. But it all seems like there was a reason.
Yeah.
There was a reason because my son was sick. I needed all the help I could get, and all these extra time, the time that IBM gave me, all of those
Yeah.
things happened to be, very useful.
Yeah.
But one of the, God, it's early in the morning here, so, but I did want to say that I think both of us, in some sense, tried to be a very positive force in the children's lives.
Yeah.
You can do it. Would always be the way we. I think both of us thought about something,
Yeah.
and it really has had an impact on the kids.
Yeah.
We were a very argumentative family, so that continues. I
Uh-huh.
was also very judgmental, according to my daughter and son. That too had its impact
Yeah.
because my children still say, my daughter especially will say when she's thinking of doing something, her mother's words are ringing in
Voice.
her
Yeah.
head. So, but certainly all of that had an impact as well.
Yeah.
But uh, uh, but we also traveled a lot
Yeah.
as much as possible in the year. We tried to, in the early years, especially, my husband would be invited to an IBM corporate event, which would be
Right.
in really lovely locations. And so we take the children with us.
Right.
And they also got used to babysitters and so
Yeah.
on. As very, very, as infants, they
Yeah.
got used to being with all kinds of strangers and so on.
Right.
So it's been quite a journey, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
was
now,
always the warrior. Yeah, go ahead.
and now with your children, as you said, they are both in New York. They have built their own life in a different
Yes,
place than, the one they were born in. So
right.
how have you and your partner Mohan, how are you navigating this new chapter in your family dynamic? And how is it
Um,
for being a very, very loud, argumentative
yes.
household to suddenly, I'm sure there will be times in the day where it will be eerily quiet.
Oh, totally. I love it because my husband retired about 4 years ago. During
Yeah.
COVID, he retired, right? And ever since, I'm complaining that I have to cook every morning because I want to cook because I can't eat his cooking. He doesn't cook. And anyway, I don't want him to because then I'll be forced to eat what he's made. But anyway, I tell him that, he should go out and be a consultant, which he was. He on and off, he takes up gigs and so on, but
Yeah.
mostly he's home. And but he's technically very active. He's always working, even
Yeah.
even now, very much connected to his world of databases and computer science. And I am working 24/7 on
Yeah.
some project or the other. I'm working on my third book, and I have many, many other projects that I'm constantly working on. So it's been wonderful to have this time off.
Yeah.
It's also wonderful to have silence. Finally, right? When we became empty nesters, that was the thing, right? Suddenly we were like just the two of us.
Yeah.
So people joke that it's a honeymoon phase all over again. In
Yeah.
some sense, it is, right? We are
Yeah.
finally together again.
Right.
And then you realize over the years how important it is to have nurture common interests with
Hmm.
your husband, because
Right.
comes a time in your life when you're focused, the mother, especially as mothers are,
Yeah.
great nurturers. Now this again, my daughter will totally disagree with me on when I say, we had this discussion, I think quite recently. Mom, that's all, a myth and all that. No, 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 I believe that women are, natural at at child rearing and so on. Um, but you can you can build a wall between yourself and your spouse
Right.
in those years when you're giving all this energy to your children.
Right.
And I know that my husband may have felt left out.
Yeah.
Lucky he's a strong man.
Yeah.
But I know he may have felt left out when the three of us were more involved in each other's lives.
Right.
But it's very important for the two of you to constantly engage with each other as well.
Right.
So that when, there are so many marriages that fail after the children leave home. I've heard of
Right.
these things,
Yeah,
right?
because there's just
Yeah,
nothing left
nothing in
in
common that you
common.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we we have been traveling a lot, mainly
Yeah.
because we feel. So my husband was 65, I think, by the time, yeah, 65, very close to 65, when he retired. And it's been 4 years now, and we are realizing that if we don't travel now,
Yeah.
it's not we are not probably going to be able to travel after we are close to 80, assuming we live
Yeah.
that long.
Yeah.
So we are trying to do as much as we can, and this year we began with about a month's travel out in the Far East,
Yeah.
with Vietnam, Cambodia, and all of that. I mean, 4 countries, 5 countries actually packed into a month. So
Wow.
we are doing a lot of that now.
Yeah.
I've also been telling him this is a time for me to really get into my writing.
Yeah.
So writing, and now, as I told you, speaking. So
Right.
I'm doing both. More than anything, I'm just spending a lot of time reading, Neha. I
Yeah.
read every week and I write about a book. So I've got into it's a
Yeah.
self-assigned project of the last 2.5 years
Yeah.
of a book and reading a book in translation and writing about it, which has given me back so much.
Yeah.
So my children read me, and it's wonderful to hear from them,
Right.
when they read what I write. So it's actually been a wonderful time after they left home. And
Hmm.
when they come, especially when my daughter comes with her husband, it's wonderful. She says I'm pampering him, and patriarchal apparently, and we all pamper our sons-in-law, all of us. Hey, he loves to eat and I love to cook for him. So anyway, so it's really really nice when they come back and they hang out, and we are able to talk like adults.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
different relationship. My daughter is the one who now advises me on stuff that I need to buy for the house,
Right.
about interior decoration, about the books I must read, about fashion.
Yeah.
Because much as I'm good with Indian fashion, according to her, I really need to,
Up your
undergo
game.
lessons on Western fashions. So she is my advisor on that. So where do you shop? So she is the one who tells me where to shop for things.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. It's actually lovely to have someone who does that, right?
Yeah.
And she asks me for recipes, and then I'm always shocking her because I tend to, when I read posts by people who dabble in Indian food,
Yeah.
and some of these are writers for New York Times and so on. And when I see that, when they use about 5 tablespoons of turmeric in a dish,
Yeah.
I got to call it out, right? And I do it right on Instagram, and my daughter is always shocked by everything I do. Mom, you don't do those things. But so there's all these, and then of course I have to write about it on Facebook as to
Yeah.
how it all happened. But but yeah, it's a lot of fun, to be able to engage with them now that they are leading their own lives. She has her own, bought an apartment, and is going through life as a young woman. She and her husband are sort of decorating it and enjoying their lives in Brooklyn, which is
Yeah.
really really nice to experience when I go there. So we try to visit them once a year at least, or
Uh-huh.
twice a year, and they come here several times. So it's exciting to watch all the things that they do,
Yeah.
and hear from them. And I love to read what she writes.
Yeah.
And it's my daughter is writing more and more about women, her beat is
Yeah.
more, while her magazine is about entrepreneurship and technology.
Yeah.
She writes for she's a staff writer for a magazine called Fast Company, which is
Yeah.
both print and digital.
Yeah.
So it's more about technology, but more and more we are seeing women's issues being discussed.
Yeah.
So I see that she's written several important articles on pregnancy, women who are pregnant women and how they are being treated by their
The
companies. And
workforce. Yeah.
so it's really exciting to see her writing the way I might write, but
Yeah.
writing with a lot more um, um, awareness
Yeah.
about the issues skewing the world. She is
Right.
always questioning me uh, on my patriarchal values
Yeah.
and my um, attitudes about things. You know,
Yeah.
it's really nice being asked, told that I have so much privilege. Mom, you can't say that. We have all this privilege. Don't
Yeah.
forget that, right?
Yeah.
She's always sensitizing me to that. So you know, it's you sort of are also you make your children, and I think you're also made by your children.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's so
so
beautiful. Yeah.
it's really nice to be in this phase of my life.
Yeah, yeah. And Kalpana, now that you talk about, how your daughter sensitizes you, so I'm very interested to know that it's been a long time, right? You've been on this journey for more than
Yeah.
3 decades now.
As
And
a writer for 25 years. Yeah,
no,
25
I'm
years.
talking about your parenting journey.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, this has been a long road for you.
Oh,
And
long road, 35 years. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And so in all these years, what's the most, I know you've been talking about these little things that keep happening, but what's sort of a most unexpected thing or things that you've learned from your children, that your children have taught you?
Yeah. So I think one thing that certainly comes to mind is this kind of aggressive parenting that we all tend to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have, you know, all the dreams. I dreamed of playing violin and I never got an opportunity. I
Yeah.
dreamed of dance. My father didn't have the money. He told me, you know, he didn't have the money to afford my lessons
Mm-hmm.
either. And
Mm.
so I foisted all my dreams on my children, right?
Yeah.
And so I tended to think that the more you push them and the more you uh, teach them, or the more you uh, what shall I say, pack their schedules,
Yeah.
the smarter they will be, or the more knowledgeable they will be, sort of thing, right? Or the better they will be in their academics,
Yeah.
or as adults and so on. That's also not very true. That's one thing that I've realized. In fact, if my children were to ask me today, and we do have discussions about this,
Yeah.
I do wish I had done certain things differently.
Uh-huh.
I wish I had not packed their schedules as much.
Mm-hmm.
One of my big regrets,
Mm-hmm.
one of my big regrets is that we didn't do enough in nature.
Yeah.
Yes, we went camping with friends. We had a lovely, and these are still very close, good friends of ours. We had a huge friend community. But one of my big regrets is that week after week, I did not take our children out on a walk
Yeah.
here in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And very recently, our son went on a very demanding hike in the eastern part of the Bay Area,
Yeah.
and he was telling me how difficult it was. And I told him, you know, this is one thing I wish I had done. And he said, Mom, you're right. I really wish you and Dad had taken us on hikes, because in the Bay Area, we are living in a part of California that is just full of these
Yeah.
beautiful walks and views.
Yeah.
Just being out in nature here is so beautiful for most of the year.
Yeah.
So imagine we don't get snowed in or at all here.
Yeah.
We don't get very we never had the kind of heat that we have today. I mean, we've been having terrible temperatures in the last week and so on. But this is an area where you can do outdoorsy things a lot.
Yeah.
And we never did enough of that week after week. It
Yeah.
was all about, okay, what's the next class you're going to? What's the
Yeah.
next thing?
Yeah.
Oh, now you have to, practice for this and practice for that.
Yeah.
Uh, so that is a big regret. So that there was no downtime in their lives in the early part of their lives.
Yeah.
So there was a certain burnout that I sense in them.
Yeah.
And there were repercussions, later on during college for both the children. So I do regret that.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Yeah.
for every young parent, I would say balance is important.
Right.
While it's important to teach an art, it's also important to just live, to
Yeah.
just veg out and do nothing. It's so
Yeah.
important to do nothing. There's no
Very
television
important.
allowed. I
Very
have to say
important.
another thing. I do have to say another thing.
Please.
I banned my children from watching television. That is, even television was scheduled.
Yeah.
And that is, they were allowed to watch certain television shows and then no more.
Mm-hmm.
I really felt that was the only way they'd read.
Yeah.
And now especially my daughter has more than made up for it. She is a queen of Netflix. She reads a lot, which is wonderful,
Yeah.
but she's also the queen of, okay, what's the next show to watch? So,
There's
so
only
she
so much that you can hold on to, Kalpana.
revenge.
Also,
I, I,
that brings me to one more question, that I have, like it's a burning question in me,
uh,
because most of your married life, or most of
right,
your life, half of your
right,
life you've been a parent. So
right.
can you really or ever kind of separate the person you and the parent you? Are they ever distinct, or are you always the mom?
Oh my God. uh, no, I think I'm able to sort of remove the hat. You know, I am able to do that, but
Mhm.
I do, when I'm talking to my kids, for
Yeah,
instance,
yeah,
uh, I'll suddenly, I guess, reach for my hat. You know what I
yeah,
mean? I'll
yeah,
reach for.
yeah,
It's impossible to not do that as a parent.
yeah,
You'll always do that, I think.
yeah,
But I don't think I do this thing anymore where I'm saying, listen, I'm the parent, so you better listen to me.
yeah, yeah.
I don't think I do that anymore. There was an instance, my son, my daughter, my son-in-law and I were
Mhm,
driving from Philadelphia. Sorry, I think New York to Philadelphia for a wedding
mhm.
last year. The four
Uh-huh.
of us. Something happened. We had a huge argument, and I said, "Okay, I'm deciding because I'm."
You pull that card.
Remember what the argument was now, what it was all about. I think it started as something between my son-in-law and my daughter, and then
Uh-huh.
it grew into something where the four of us were yelling at each other or whatever. I don't even remember now. So funny. But I did say, okay, guys, I'm deciding because I'm your mom or whatever.
How did it go?
Not well, not well. Even my son-in-law got mad at me, but it was so funny. So yeah, so I did. You see how I reached for that hat at that
Yeah,
point
yeah,
when everything was, we were talking like four friends or whatever, right?
yeah,
But I tend to do that once in a while, but I am able to distance myself.
yeah.
And more, I'm able to do that with my daughter better than I am with my son. With my
Mhm.
son, I'm still a bit of a hoverer
Yeah,
because he had some health issues, and I think I've pampered him more than I have my daughter. Also,
yeah.
because he's the second one, my daughter often says, he's your favorite child. And my husband and I say, no, you are our favorite daughter, he's our favorite son. So I tend to do that with my son, but I've learned to sort of unreel,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sort
And
of
kind of
step back,
step back.
step
Yeah,
back, yes.
yeah,
Uh, when
yeah.
I do catch myself doing it sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh,
And also, Kalpana, because you were such a busy parent and such an involved parent, so
yeah.
were there any when you were in the thick of things, were there any small kind of indulgences or guilty pleasures that you had just for yourself while you were busy,
Oh
tending
yeah.
to kids?
Oh yeah. And for that, I do have to credit um, one, a group of mine called, we call it Gumbal here. Gumbal
What
means
do you call it?
Gumbal.
Okay.
Gumbal means crowd. Okay.
Oh,
Crowd. That's what
in
it
what
means.
language?
In Tamil.
Okay.
So we are a bunch of about 18 families here.
Wow.
Um, and couple of them in that group, and especially one, she's the oldest, she's the matriarch, I think, of our group. I think she's the oldest, yeah. She used to arrange this outing for Mother's Day,
Oh,
where we would go out for couple of nights, I believe it was. So we'd all drive down. She'd decide. So it was always around Mother's Day, a
uh-huh.
weekend of Mother's Day. And she would arrange the whole thing. And of course, we'd share the expenses
Yeah.
from driving to the stay and everything. But she would do an amazing job of packing food, ordering, catering food, making some of her own dishes and so on. And mothers would just huddle together, talk about everything under the sun.
Wow.
And that was such a special, it's been a very special memory in those years when life was so difficult.
Yeah.
And so during that weekend, my husband was in charge of the kids. And this happened year after year for many years. And the person who did that is turning 70 on August 3rd.
Oh,
So
wow.
my she's been a real force in my life, even with respect to parenting and so on.
Yeah.
She has all these discussions with all of us. And I've really learned a lot from all the mothers around me.
Mm-hmm.
I have some very close friendships as well with others,
Yeah.
friends of mine whom I've known for only since I was born, literally.
Yeah.
Um, some other friends that I made over the years after I came to the Bay Area who are very close to me. So even now, it's the other thing is it's so hard, right, to sustain friendships
Yeah.
over the years of our parenting also.
Yeah.
While we are raising a family, we've also got to sustain all these friendships.
Right.
It's not a joke, and there is a lot that sort of falls by the wayside.
Yeah.
We can remember to nurture those friendships,
Yeah.
and you don't realize it until your child gets married. It's
Yeah.
only when I got married, I realized how all of these people have been on this journey with me,
Yeah.
over the years. One friend made a very artistic Ganesha for me that would greet people as they walked into the wedding.
Wow.
She's more like a godmother to both my children.
Yeah.
So she made something. She spent weeks working on it, on
Yeah.
this terracotta Ganesha. So all of these friendships, and then a bunch of other very close friends made a meal for the my son-in-law's parents when they
Uh-huh.
arrived in the Bay Area. The 4 or 5 families that I had vended this work out to
Yeah.
basically gave them a welcome.
Yeah.
It's we realize how much all that investment is
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
over the course of the years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't let anything slide
Yeah.
just because you're parenting. And there was another parent, and in fact, it still continues today, believe it or not. There was this parent who hosted this thing called Bad Music Night,
Oh,
where you could sing as badly as you wanted. We all did, of course. But the interesting thing is, from bad music, it descended to bad dance. So it was more of a dance night. So there were some 18 or 20, 24 families. It was another group. So
yeah.
that group was part North Indian, part South Indian, right?
Uh-huh.
And our children were part of the bad music night
Yeah.
where they danced or they played the violin, they sang.
Yeah.
They have so many fond memories of of those
How
gigs
frequent this bad music night would
every
be?
year, every year once in
Wow.
August, every
Wow.
year. And it was a mega event which would begin around 5 o'clock with appetizers, and it would end about at about 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning
I'm
sometimes.
sure 24 families, so how many
Right?
more kids and
So
everybody
many
wants to
kids.
perform?
Right. And then Diwali parties also were very big. I'm saying, so it's very important to acknowledge that all the reason uh, I think the children are socially very well equipped is also not just because of the parenting,
Yeah.
but also because of all the families that have, like Mrs. Clinton said, it takes a village. It
Village.
really,
Yeah.
really does,
Yeah.
because I think their sense of who they are was always relative to who the other children were.
Right.
You them really helped them help themselves.
Yeah. And have
Uh,
they continued being friends with some of these
so,
people?
so with some of and with Gumbal as well as the other group, there were some people who have become, I mean, we've all stayed friends, of course,
Yeah.
but in varying degrees, I would
Yeah.
say. With
Yeah.
some you're closer, with some not so. But the children have some very special friendships with certain people of their age in these groups.
Right.
So,
Right.
and it still continues.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
many of them have had children as well.
Yeah.
And this continues within these groups. It's
Yeah.
really, really
And it's
um,
like, what it reminds me of that, okay, of course, you left your town, village, cities
uh, the
behind,
city,
and then, yeah,
country.
country behind, and then you are in another country, and then you are building your town, city,
Yes,
village here, and
right.
then increasingly it becomes your clan, it becomes the
It
kind of
becomes
extended family, and then
families.
yeah, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it is the dance that, the Gumbal families put a dance together. Of course, we requested it, but all families do that.
Yeah.
For our daughter, they put up a fantastic show
Wow.
during the wedding. So we do it for each other, and it's just part
Yeah.
of the being part of the group.
Right.
Uh,
And
so it's
how you make your own traditions and how you follow those traditions,
all those
and then they
traditions.
get passed on, and hopefully through generations now. And
Fully, yeah.
yeah.
And it's just been a very, very supportive environment.
Yeah.
And for all of us who came from India, we've really struggled to give Indian values to
Yeah.
our kids.
Yeah.
Certain some values were very, very important that we needed to pass on.
Yeah.
And it's an eternal, it's still a struggle, but I will say that we are now seeing it as they go on to have their own families. We
Yeah.
are seeing that it pays off,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they are now seeking to give some of the same values to their kids.
Yeah.
You know.
And before so we are almost nearing the end of our episode,
Okay,
Kalpana. Yeah, but
fantastic.
before I ask you the last question,
Sure.
I am going to ask you one more question, which your comment kind of propelled me to ask. Has there, because they are in even though they are second generation migrants now, your kids, but have they faced any sort of othering in this country? And have you seen them sort of navigating this whole dilemma of who they are they strangers in this country, or it's not theirs? And how has that been?
Um, I'm trying to think about this. I one of the things that I want to say is maybe it's because of the choices we made
Hmm.
about where they would go to school.
Yeah.
Uh, we Early on they were in schools that had a lot of people of um, you know their backgrounds, right?
Right.
So many Indians and Pakistanis and so on. many of them and Asians in general.
Yeah.
So the very first private school was really a mix of very like people. But when they went into public school, which
Mm.
is local government schools,
Yeah.
certainly you saw a different demographic
Yeah.
right there, and it's been a very very ideal choice for them. They still talk about how moving them from the private environment to public school was the best thing that we ever did,
Oh,
um, because they really wanted to be where the world was,
right.
so where this is the real world,
Yeah.
and this is how they want it to be. So although, as my daughter always tells me, we are in a neighborhood called Saratoga,
Mm-hmm.
which is still, if you look at Saratoga High School, it's still more like a private school in the sense that the system determines who can buy a house in Saratoga.
Right.
And accordingly, your demographics are determined. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's still not as mixed a population,
Democratic. Yeah.
democratic as you would think it is.
Yeah.
So my daughter has, I don't think my daughter and son have experienced any kind of othering.
Mm-hmm.
There were cliques. They
Mm-hmm.
would talk about how you have this Indian clique, you have this Asian, the Chinese clique. You had all these, but most of the time, I think it's not been a very negative environment at all.
Yeah.
Uh, there was a feeling among many people that the Indian community, for sure, the Indian community is very good at studies,
Uh-huh.
academics,
Yeah.
and all of. There were comments, I think, to that effect
Yeah.
once in a while that my children would bring home, and so there is, in some sense, you could think of it as a stigma, right?
Right.
That where the families are so focused on academics and getting the right grades and so on. There is that I've heard that, but I don't think it was in a I don't believe it's been a very negative experience, no.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
our daughter went on to private college,
Yeah.
which is a while it is also got a lot of Indians.
Mm-hmm.
This is at Northwestern. She went to Middle at Northwestern. It is still a very nice mix of people.
Mm-hmm.
And our son, on the other hand, went to UC Berkeley, which is a
Mm-hmm.
public university,
Yeah.
one of great public institutions here. And that is it is a very
As cosmopolitan as it gets.
you can, but although it has a preponderance of people from India and
Yeah.
parts of Asia and so on, it is still a nice mix of people.
Yeah.
And so that is one of the wonderful things that I will say that we have not experienced that, at
Yeah.
least not up to now. And
Yeah.
my husband would always say, if you're good at what you do,
Mm-hmm.
you will rarely face discrimination. I think that's too broad,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, painting with a broad brush kind of thing. But we have not faced that,
Yeah.
fortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
been lucky.
Yeah. How wonderful to hear that. And I'm glad that it has worked out this way for you all. And now, as I said, that you are coming to the end of this episode, and I have one parting question for you, Kalpana. And now I want you to put on the teacher hat and
Oh my God.
tell us
But
tell
I'll
us what,
try.
yeah, for all the young and old parents listening, what's that one last message that you'd like to leave our listeners with? That's something that embodies your spirit and resonates with your journey throughout, as a parent, as a human being till now. What is that one lesson or one insight that you would want us to be left with?
And I really think staying positive,
Hmm.
and always giving a positive message to the kids. I didn't always do that. I'd be the first one to admit this. But I do want to say, even when the children call to talk to me,
Yeah.
uh, I try to make it a very pleasant experience. I'm very conscious of that.
Hmm.
And when my sometimes when my husband, who is a very black and white man,
Yeah.
tends to go into the negative, I'll always say, no, stay positive. Don't ask about that or ask about it differently.
Yeah.
Give a positive message on every phone call as much as you can. Because this is what my father did. My parents did that with me. And these are all the only memories I have of my parents.
Yeah.
My father would come on the line, and more than my mother, my father was a master at this. He would say, "Okay, baby, so tell me, what song is Parthiv learning now? So tell me, what's the next thing?" He was very interested in their musical and my daughter's dance journey and so on.
Right.
So what are they learning now? Let's go forward. Let's not talk about the fact that, you didn't return my phone call. If
Yeah.
they tried to call me and I didn't return their phone call, they would not talk about, or yell at me or question me on why I didn't do that. Instead, let's move on to something positive.
Yeah.
You know, they would not. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but this positivity is very, very important, especially as you go into the later years, your own
Yeah.
later years, because now your children have a choice of whether they want to engage with you or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when they've become adults, you want them to engage with you. You
Yeah.
need to be positive.
Yeah.
So have as much laughter as you can on all your phone calls, and, make fun of them, be made fun of, be ready to accept that.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
if you can remember to be positive, I
Yeah.
think that's the most wonderful thing you can do for your relationship with your kids, especially when they reach adulthood.
Yeah. And I think this is so important that you've said that, Kalpana, that, increasingly, even in earlier times, it was a choice, but still you were bound with this institutionalization of the whole family unit and this whole social structures around it. And now, it's a choice. If the children
Yeah.
can decide to engage with you or not. And
So even though,
it's,
yeah, even though in the Indian system, there is an entitlement, there's an entitlement of parent towards child and child towards parent.
yeah,
Even though we have that, my children are now growing up, or rather, they become adults in America. So
yeah,
you know, the same rules that apply in India don't often apply here.
yeah.
And so I really feel it is even more important
Yeah,
for me to leave a lasting impact on the kids as
yeah,
someone who's positive and who's nurturing,
yeah,
who's been a hoverer, but who's always been positive until the very end.
yeah, yeah. And for them to, and this is a testimony to, with being a helicopter mom, if you can manage to have your kids several times in a year over to your house and be have it a household it being a household full of laughter and arguments and that noise and that chaos. I think that's a testimony to how positive an influence you've been on your kids, and they choose to engage with you even now. So I think that
by,
says
by
something.
text, by iMessage, by text, by Instagram, where they are always appalled at anything I might say, by different forms, and of course in person as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah. So, how beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story, Kalpana. Your
thank
journey, to
you.
me, it's a reminder that, parenthood, with all its joys and challenges, shapes us into the people we end up becoming as we grow older. And it's a constant evolution, a beautiful, as you said, you talked about the art forms. So I would use that metaphor and extend it further. I think it's a beautiful dance between nurturing our
Yeah.
children and discovering who we are as individuals within that family unit and also within the society at large. And we loved seeing glimpses of your insightful journey. Thank you for making us a
Thank
part
you,
of it.
Neha. This has been absolutely wonderful. You took me on a journey as well. Thank you.
This has been really, really great. And to all our listeners, we hope that you found Kalpana's story as insightful and inspiring as we did. And if you did, share this episode with someone who may need to hear it. And remember, parenthood isn't a destination, it's a journey of love, learning, and growth. Embrace the laughter, the meltdowns, the messy moments, and the milestones, big and small. And here's to the fellow parents out there navigating this incredible adventure one day at a time. Until next time, this is Neha Garg signing off. Stay well and take care.